What happens when the weakest becomes the one they all bow to? For Celeste Ashwood, being an Omega meant invisible chains, scrubbing floors while Alphas feasted, lowering her gaze when warriors passed, enduring whispers that she was too soft, too small, too nothing to matter. Born into the Silvercrest pack under a moonless sky, she had spent 23 years believing what everyone told her, that she was meant to serve and never to lead, that her mate bond, when it came, would be her only salvation, her one chance at protection in a world that devoured the weak. But when Alpha Darius Thornwood stood before 1,000 witnesses at the lunar ceremony and spoke the words that severed their bond, I, Darius Thornwood, reject you, Celeste Ashwood, as my mate. Everything she thought she knew shattered like ice beneath a wolf's paw. And what happens next, no one was prepared for. Not the pack, not the Alpha King who sentenced her to death, and certainly not the 10 ancient guardians, who'd been hunting through centuries for the one the prophecy promised would come. The girl they threw away was never an Omega at all. The lunar ceremony had drawn wolves from 7 territories. Celeste stood at the edge of the grand clearing, her thin ceremonial dress doing little against the autumn wind that swept down from the northern mountains. Around her, the pack gathered in concentric circles, Alphas and their families at the center near the sacred moonstone, Betas forming the middle rings, and Omegas like her pressed to the outer edges where the torchlight barely reached. She could smell everything. That was both blessing and curse for wolves like her, senses sharp enough to detect the honey wine being poured for the nobility, the roasted venison that would never touch her lips, and beneath it all, the complex tapestry of emotions wafting from hundreds of bodies. Anticipation, excitement, greed, and from one wolf in particular, a scent that made her heart thunder against her ribs, forest after rain, smoldering embers, ozone before a lightning strike, tempered steel. Darius, her fated mate, though they'd never spoken of it aloud. The bond had snapped into place 6 months ago when she'd been carrying linens past the training grounds, and their eyes had met across 50 yards of dirt and sweat. She'd felt it like a rope of starlight wrapping around her chest, pulling tight, and she'd seen his nostrils flare. He'd felt it too, but he'd looked away, turned his back, and in the month since, he'd pretended she didn't exist. The Alpha addresses us, someone hissed, and Celeste's attention snapped forward. Darius Thornwood stood atop the ceremonial platform, moonlight turning his dark hair silver. He was everything an Alpha should be, 6.5 feet of muscle and authority, a jaw that could have been carved from granite, eyes the color of amber that currently swept across his pack with practiced dominance. At his side stood Seraphina Kane, a female, Alpha from the neighboring Ironclaw pack. Beautiful, dangerous. Her scent, cinnamon and iron and something sharp like fresh blood, drifted even to where Celeste stood. Tonight, Darius announced, his voice carrying without effort across the entire gathering, we solidify an alliance that will make Silvercrest the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories. Tonight, I claim my chosen mate. Chosen. Not fated. Celeste's wolf stirred within her for the first time in months, a creature she'd always experienced as more of a whisper than a roar. No, her wolf whimpered. Wrong. He's ours. But laws were laws, and Alpha could reject a fated mate in favor of a chosen one if it served the pack's interests. It happened. Not often. The moon goddess frowned upon it. But it happened. And when it did, the rejected mate. Her hands trembled. She clasped them together, trying to disappear further into the shadows. However, Darius continued, and his gaze locked onto her across the distance, like a predator spotting prey. Before I can move forward, I must address an inconvenience. Time stopped. Every head turned. 1,000 pairs of eyes found her in the darkness. The scent of shock and curiosity and vicious delight rolled across the clearing in waves. Darius descended from the platform, and the crowd parted before him like water. His beta, Marcus, followed 2 steps behind, and Seraphina drifted after them like a red-dressed shadow. They walked directly toward Celeste, and she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there as her entire world collapsed around her. He stopped 3 feet away. Up close, his scent overwhelmed everything, that steel and storm smell that had haunted her dreams for half a year. but threaded through it now was something cold, calculation, ambition, contempt. "Celeste Ashwood," he said formally, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The moon goddess, in her mysterious wisdom, created a bond between us, a bond I never wanted, a bond that serves no purpose." Someone laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the night. Celeste's throat closed. She forced herself to meet his eyes, amber and utterly empty of warmth. "Darius, you will address me as Alpha Thornwood," he corrected, and the dismissal in his tone flayed her open. "You are Omega. I am Alpha. There was never going to be any other outcome." Her wolf howled inside her, a sound of pure anguish that no one else could hear. "By the laws of the pack and the ancient rites," Darius continued, his voice ringing out across the ceremony grounds, "I, Darius Thornwood, Alpha of the Silvercrest Pack, formally reject you, Celeste Ashwood, as my mate. I sever this bond. I deny the moon goddess's choice. I cast you out." The words hit like physical blows. The bond, that rope of starlight she'd treasured even as it went unacknowledged, began to unravel. She gasped, doubling over as pain lanced through her chest. It felt like someone had reached inside her ribcage and was slowly tearing her heart in two. Her wolf screamed, thrashing against the cage of her body, and Celeste collapsed to her knees on the cold ground. "Accept it," Darius said flatly, staring down at her. "Say the words." She couldn't. If she accepted the rejection, the bond would sever completely. She'd be unmated, packless, nothing. But the pain was intensifying, spreading through her veins like liquid fire, and she couldn't think, couldn't fight, couldn't. The word tore from her throat. "I accept." The bond snapped. Celeste screamed. The sound ripped out of her, raw and broken, and she felt something inside her chest shatter like glass. The pain was indescribable, every nerve ending on fire, her wolf's anguish mixing with her own until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She was dimly aware of collapsing fully onto the ground, her cheek pressed against cold earth that smelled of winter and decay. Through the haze of agony, she heard Darius's voice, distant and unconcerned. "Remove her from Packlands. She has until dawn. After that, she's rogue." Strong hands grabbed her arms, guards. They hauled her up, and her legs wouldn't support her weight. Everything hurt. Everything was breaking. She caught a glimpse of faces in the crowd, some pitying, most indifferent, a few openly smirking. And there, near the back, her parents. Her mother's face was pale, her father's expression unreadable. But neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. They didn't even try. The guards dragged her through the parted crowd. Behind her she heard Darius's voice rise again, confident and strong. "Now, where we were. Seraphina Kane, will you accept my claim as chosen mate?" "I will," Seraphina purred, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Celeste closed her eyes and let them take her away. They dumped her at the northern border where Silvercrest territory ended and the wildlands began. The head guard, a beta named Roland, at least, had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," he muttered, though he didn't meet her eyes. "Orders are orders. You've got until dawn." Then they were gone, and she was alone. Celeste lay where they'd left her for a long time, curled on her side in the dirt, shaking. The pain from the severed bond had settled into a constant throbbing ache that made breathing difficult. Her wolf had gone silent, withdrawn so deep inside her that Celeste couldn't feel her presence anymore. Maybe she'd never come back. Maybe that was how it worked when you were rejected. Maybe something inside you just died. The night air was freezing. She was still wearing only the thin ceremonial dress, bare feet already numb from cold. Around her, the forest loomed, ancient pines that blocked out the moonlight, undergrowth thick with thorns and shadows. In the distance, something howled. Not a wolf, something else. She should move, she should run, try to find shelter, do something to survive. But what was the point? Where would she go? She had no pack, no family that wanted her, no skills except cleaning and serving. She was an Omega without a pack, which meant she was nothing, less than nothing. "This is it then," she whispered to the darkness. "This is how it ends." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of coming snow. A storm was building. She could feel it in her bones, the way the air pressure changed, the quality of the silence. A winter storm this early in the season would be brutal. Out here, exposed, she wouldn't last 2 hours. Maybe that was a mercy. Celeste forced herself to sit up, though every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her chest. She couldn't just lie here and wait to die, even if some part of her wanted to. She needed shelter. Something. Anything. She stumbled forward into the forest on legs that barely held her weight. Time became meaningless. She walked, or tried to, navigating by instinct through the darkness. The temperature continued to drop. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier, until it was coming down in thick sheets that turned the world into a blur of white and black. Her dress was soaked through. Her fingers had gone from numb to burning to numb again. She couldn't feel her feet anymore, and still she walked, because stopping meant dying, and some stubborn part of her refused to just give up and fade away. She didn't know how long she'd been walking when she saw it, a structure barely visible through the snow. An old barn, or what was left of one, its roof partially collapsed, but 3 walls still standing. Shelter. Celeste half walked, half fell through the opening that had once held doors. Inside, the air was marginally warmer, shielded from the worst of the wind. Hay rotted in one corner, and broken farming equipment rusted in another, but there was a relatively dry patch of floor near the back wall. She collapsed there, curling into the tightest ball she could manage, trying desperately to conserve what little body heat she had left. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. The cold was seeping into her bones, making her thoughts slow and fuzzy. This was hypothermia. This was her body shutting down. She'd learned about it once, in the Pack's basic survival training that even Omegas received. At least it doesn't hurt anymore, she thought distantly. The pain from the severed bond had faded to background noise. Everything was fading. That was probably bad. She thought about Darius, no, Alpha Thornwood, standing on that platform with Seraphina at his side. She thought about her parents' faces in the crowd, passive and unwilling to intervene. She thought about all the years she'd spent trying to be small enough, quiet enough, good enough to deserve basic kindness. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her wolf, to the moon goddess, to no one. "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." Her eyes drifted closed. The darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, and for the first time in months, she felt something like peace. And then, warmth. It came gradually, spreading across her frozen body like sunlight breaking through clouds. Celeste's eyes fluttered open, confused. Had she died? Was this what came after? No, she could see breath, not hers, but others, condensing in the cold air. She could feel weight around her, pressure, warmth radiating from multiple sources, bodies. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, and then she saw them. Wolves, massive wolves, far larger than any she'd ever seen, formed a circle around her with their bodies pressed close. They were keeping her warm. One, the largest, easily twice the size of a normal alpha, had positioned itself directly against her back, and she could feel its heartbeat, slow and steady, through its thick fur. Another smaller one had its head resting near hers, breath warming her face. She counted them, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10. 10. Enormous wolves, all surrounding her, protecting her from the storm, sharing their body heat to keep her alive. "What?" she breathed, the word barely a whisper. The largest wolf, the one against her back, shifted. She felt it change positions, and then a voice spoke, low and rough and male, vibrating through the darkness. "We've been waiting for you." Terror shot through her. Rogues, but rogues were feral, mindless. These wolves were organized, careful, and they'd just saved her life. The large wolf moved again, and she heard bones flowing, the subtle sounds of transformation. A moment later, a man knelt where the wolf had been. She couldn't see him clearly in the darkness, but she could smell him. Aged oak, winter snow, pine forests, approaching storms. It was an old scent, layered with centuries, and it made something deep in her chest respond despite her exhaustion. "Don't be afraid," he said, and his voice carried an authority that rivaled any alpha she'd ever met. We mean you no harm? We are the Shadow Guard, and we have been searching for you for 500 years. 500? That was impossible. Wolves didn't live that long. Unless you're not normal wolves, she managed, her voice shaking from cold and shock. No, he agreed. We're not. And neither are you, Celeste Ashwood, though you don't know it yet. He paused and she heard him settle back on his heels. Sleep now. You're safe. When you wake, we'll explain everything. But first, you need to heal. I don't understand. You will. His hand, large, calloused, radiating warmth, touched her forehead gently. Sleep. And despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the thousand questions screaming in her mind, her eyes drifted closed. The last thing she felt was that circle of warmth tightening around her and the steady breathing of 10 ancient guardians who'd waited half a millennium for her to finally arrive. She woke to sunlight streaming through cracks in the barn's roof and the smell of cooking meat. Celeste sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. She was still wearing the tattered remains of her ceremonial dress, now stiff with dried mud and melted snow, but someone had draped a thick fur cloak over her while she slept. The barn looked different in daylight, less menacing, more simply abandoned, and arranged in a circle around a small fire pit that definitely hadn't been there last night. 10 figures sat watching her with varying expressions of curiosity and relief. 9 men and 1 woman, all of them radiating power that made her instinctively want to bare her throat in submission. But there was something else too, a strange feeling of rightness, as though being surrounded by them was exactly where she was meant to be. The one who'd spoken last night sat closest to her. In daylight, she could see him properly. He looked to be in his mid-30s, though something in his eyes suggested he was far older. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, a face that might have been handsome if not for the brutal scar running from his left eye down to his jaw, and a body built like a warrior who'd seen countless battles. He wore dark leather armor that looked both ancient and immaculately maintained, and when he moved, it was with the careful grace of a predator. "You're awake," he observed, his voice that same low rumble from the night before. "Good. We were beginning to worry." "Who are you?" Celeste's voice came out hoarse. "What do you want with me?" "I am Kirin Nightshade," he replied, "commander of the Shadow Guard. These are my second, Lyra Stormborn." He gestured to the woman who had white blonde hair and eyes like ice. "And the others, Thorn, Ash, Ryder, Flint, Sage, Dax, Wolf, and Gray." Each of them nodded as their name was called. They were all formidable in different ways, some younger-looking, others clearly aged by battle, but all carrying themselves with the confidence of elite warriors. The Shadow Guard, Celeste repeated slowly. "I've never heard of you." "You wouldn't have," Lyra said, her voice clear and sharp. "We've been hidden for centuries, bound by prophecy to wait, to watch, to search." "For what?" Kirin's eyes, dark gray, storm-colored, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "For you, for the matriarch, for the one who would restore the ancient bloodline and bring balance back to our kind." Celeste almost laughed, except nothing about this felt like a joke. "You have the wrong person. I'm nobody. I'm an Omega. I was rejected and cast out. I'm—" "Exactly who you're supposed to be," Kirin interrupted quietly. "Everything that happened to you, Celeste, happened for a reason. Your low status, the suppression of your power, the rejection, it was all necessary." "Necessary?" Anger flared hot in her chest, momentarily burning through the exhaustion. Being humiliated in front of the entire pack was necessary? Yes? He held her gaze steadily. Because the binding on your power could only be broken by a mate bond severing, and it had to be done willingly. You had to accept the rejection, or the magic would have remained intact. "What binding? What are you talking about?" Kirin exchanged glances with the others, then rose smoothly to his feet. "There's much to tell you, and little of it will be easy to hear. But you deserve the truth." He moved to the fire pit, stirring the coals with a long stick. 600 years ago, wolves were different, stronger, more connected to the magic that flows through all living things. There were bloodlines that carried gifts beyond the normal, healing, empathy, the ability to command not through dominance but through understanding. And at the center of it all, there was always a matriarch, A female alpha whose power surpassed even the strongest males. She bound packs together, prevented wars, maintained balance. What happened? Celeste whispered. Greed, Lyra answered bitterly. Male. Alphas decided they didn't want to answer to female authority. They hunted the matriarchs, killed them, destroyed their bloodlines. By the time anyone realized what was being lost, it was too late. The gifts faded, packs fractured, violence became the only law. The moon goddess wept, Kirin continued, and she made a prophecy. That one day when the packs were ready, a new matriarch would be born. She would come from nothing, rise from the ashes of rejection, and restore what was lost. He turned to face her fully. That prophecy described you, Celeste, in every detail. That's impossible. When wolves are born who will be matriarchs, they're born under a moonless sky. He said it like a simple fact. Were you? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Her mother had mentioned it once, how strange it had been that the moon disappeared completely the night she was born. Their power manifests early, Kirin continued, which makes them dangerous to those who fear strong females. So, the power is bound, sealed away with blood magic, usually by the parents, who believe they're protecting their child. Were your parents unusually insistent that you never try to shift before your first formal transformation ceremony? Celeste's mouth went dry. They had been. She'd thought it was normal, that all parents were that protective. But looking back, there had been an edge of desperation to it. Of fear. The binding can only be broken by a mate bond severing, Kirin said. The shock to the system, the pain, the sudden absence of that connection, it shatters the magical seal. Your power is free now, Celeste. You just don't know how to access it yet. She looked down at her hands. They looked the same as always, small, pale, unremarkable. I don't feel powerful. I feel broken. You're not broken. Thorn spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he could tear a tree in half. You're wounded. There's a difference. Wounds heal. How do you know all this? Celeste asked. How can you be sure the prophecy is about me? Kirin reached into his armor and pulled out something small. He opened his palm, revealing a pendant, silver, ancient, carved with symbols she didn't recognize. This was given to the first commander of the Shadow Guard by the last living matriarch before she died. It reacts to the presence of the bloodline. For 500 years it's been cold and dark. He held it up, and even in the dim barn she could see it glowing with soft silver light. Until we found you. The light pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Your wolf is awakening, Lyra added. You can't feel her yet because the binding suppressed her for so long. But she's there, stronger than you can imagine. When she finally emerges, she smiled, fierce and proud. The whole world will know the matriarch has returned. Celeste shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't know how to be what you think I am. I don't know anything except how to follow orders and stay out of the way. Then we'll teach you. Kirin's voice was firm but not unkind. We've waited centuries for you, Celeste. We can wait a little longer for you to be ready. She met his eyes, storm gray and ancient and absolutely certain, and felt something shift inside her. Not her wolf, not yet, but something else. A tiny ember of hope warming her from within. Maybe she wasn't broken. Maybe she was just becoming something new. Okay, she whispered. Okay, teach me. And Kirin smiled, a real smile that transformed his scarred face and made him look younger, lighter. With pleasure, my lady. Welcome to the Shadow Guard. Welcome home. The first lesson was breathing. Before you can access your wolf, Kirin explained, sitting cross-legged across from her on the barn floor while the others gave them space. You need to quiet everything else. The pain, the fear, the doubt. You need to find the center of yourself, the place where your power lives. Celeste tried. She really did. But every time she closed her eyes and reached inward, all she found was the howling emptiness where her mate bond used to be, and the terrible silence where her wolf should be. I can't, she said after the fifth failed attempt, frustration making her voice sharp. There's nothing there. There is, Kirin insisted patiently. You're just looking in the wrong place. Stop searching for what you've lost. Search for what's always been there. I don't know what that means. He was quiet for a moment, considering. Then, Tell me about a time when you felt strong, when you felt like yourself, not what everyone told you to be." Celeste frowned. Strong? She'd never been strong. She'd been... A memory surfaced, unexpected and vivid. She'd been 14, working in the pack house kitchens. One of the other Omega girls, younger, newer, had dropped a tray of dishes in front of the visiting Alpha from a neighboring pack. The girl had been terrified. The visiting Alpha was known for his cruelty, and he'd been seconds away from striking her when Celeste had stepped between them. She hadn't thought about it, hadn't considered the consequences. She'd just moved, placing herself between the threat and someone vulnerable. The visiting Alpha had sneered at her, called her names, but he hadn't touched the younger girl. There was a girl," she said slowly. "She was going to get hurt. I stopped it." "How did that feel?" "Right," Celeste admitted. "It felt right. Like that was what I was supposed to do." "That's your center," Kieran said quietly. "That instinct to protect, to shield the vulnerable. That's not Omega behavior, Celeste. That's a leader. That's a queen. Find that feeling again? Hold on to it." She closed her eyes, breathed, reached past the pain, past the emptiness, searching for that feeling of rightness, of purpose, and there, a flicker, small, distant, but real. A presence that felt like coming home. "Hello?" she thought toward it. Nothing. But the flicker grew slightly stronger. "Please," she thought. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we need each other. Please come back." And deep in her chest, something stirred. Not words, not yet, but a feeling. Warmth spreading through her veins like sunlight, and with it, power. Raw and untamed and absolutely vast. Her eyes snapped open. "I felt it. I felt her." Kieran's smile was brilliant. "Excellent. Now we build on that." They worked for hours, then days. The Shadow Guard took turns training her, each bringing their own expertise. Lyra taught her combat basics, how to fall without breaking bones, how to use an opponent's strength against them, how to read body language for tells. "You're smaller than most wolves you'll face," Lyra explained, demonstrating a throw that sent the massive thorn tumbling despite his size. "So you need to be smarter." Ash taught her tracking and survival, how to read signs in the forest, which plants were edible, which were poisonous, how to find water in any terrain. "Power means nothing if you can't stay alive long enough to use it," he said pragmatically. Sage, who was quieter than the others, taught her meditation and focus. "Your gifts will be empathic," he explained. "You'll feel what others feel. Without training, that will overwhelm you. You need to learn to control what comes in." And Kieran taught her about pack dynamics, politics, the intricate web of power and loyalty that bound wolves together. But more than that, he taught her to see herself differently. "Stop thinking like prey," he told her one afternoon when she'd instinctively ducked her head as he approached. "You're not prey anymore. You're a predator. Act like it." It was hard. Everything she'd learned for 23 years screamed at her to be small, be quiet, don't challenge, don't take up space. But gradually, something began to shift. She started meeting people's eyes instead of looking away. She started speaking her thoughts instead of swallowing them. She started standing straight instead of hunched, and with each small change, she felt her wolf growing stronger. The flicker became a steady presence, then a voice, not in words exactly, but in feelings and impressions that she learned to interpret. "Danger," her wolf would whisper when they were training and someone was about to strike. "Trust," her wolf murmured when she was uncertain about the guard's loyalty. "Home," her wolf sighed when she sat around the fire with them in the evenings, listening to their stories. 3 weeks after the rejection, Kieran declared it was time. "Your wolf is ready," he said. "She's been patient, but she wants out, and you need to let her come." They gathered in a clearing deep in the forest, far from any pack territory. The 10 members of the Shadow Guard formed a protective circle around her, all of them already in their true forms, and they were magnificent. Massive, dire wolves, each one, larger than any alpha, with coats ranging from Lyra's pure white to Wolf's midnight black. They were what werewolves had been before the bloodlines weakened. They were legends made flesh, and they were waiting for her to join them. Celeste stood in the center of the circle, wearing simple clothes that Lyra had found for her, and closed her eyes. She reached for her wolf, not frantically, but calmly, confidently, like reaching for an old friend. "Ready?" she asked. The response was immediate and joyful. "Yes." Finally, "Yes." "Then let's meet the world together." The transformation began. It wasn't like the painful, violent shifts she'd heard other wolves describe. This was fluid, natural. She felt her bones flowing, reshaping, growing. Felt fur emerging from her skin in waves of silver and white. Felt her senses expanding. Suddenly she could smell everything, hear the heartbeat of every wolf around her, taste the wind, and know a storm was 3 days away. Power erupted through her like lightning through water, crackling along her nerves and making the very air shimmer. She felt herself growing, larger than she'd been, larger than any wolf she'd ever seen except the guard. Energy built in her chest, demanding release, and she threw her head back and howled. The sound shook the forest. Birds erupted from trees, small animals fled in terror, and the 10 wolves of the Shadow Guard raised their voices in answer, a chorus of recognition and triumph that echoed for miles. When the howl faded and Celeste opened her eyes, her new eyes, she saw the world in colors she'd never known existed, and she saw the guard, all of them, staring at her with something like awe. Kieran shifted back to human form, his expression stunned. My God, you're beautiful." Celeste looked down at herself, silver-white fur that seemed to glow in the fading sunlight, paws that could crush stone, a body easily as large as Kieran's wolf form, maybe larger, and when she padded to the edge of the clearing to see her reflection in a still pool, she saw eyes that had changed from ordinary brown to brilliant molten gold. "This is who I am," she thought, wonder filling her. "This is who I've always been." Her wolf's response was a rumble of satisfaction. "Yes." Finally. Matriarch. The weeks that followed became a rhythm of training, learning, and growing into herself. The Shadow Guard treated her with respect that bordered on reverence, but they also pushed her harder than anyone ever had. Kieran especially seemed determined to prepare her for something, though he wouldn't say what. "You'll know when the time comes," he said cryptically. She learned to control her shifting, fluid transitions between forms until she could do it in seconds. She discovered her gifts, an empathic sense that let her feel the emotions of those around her, a healing ability that could knit wounds closed with a touch, and most startlingly, a command voice that could compel obedience from even the strongest wolf. "That's the rarest gift," Lyra explained after Celeste had accidentally made Thorn freeze mid-stride with a casually spoken, "Stop." "It's not about dominance, it's about authority. When a matriarch gives an order, wolves want to obey because they trust her judgment completely." But the greatest discovery came late one night when she couldn't sleep. She'd wandered away from their camp. They'd moved to a cave system that offered better shelter, and found herself on a cliff overlooking the valley. The moon was full and bright, and something inside her resonated with its light. She shifted without thinking about it, and as her paws hit stone, she felt connected to the earth beneath her, to the trees around her, to every living thing for miles. "This is your territory," her wolf whispered, "all of it." "No," she murmured aloud, human words strange in her wolf's throat. "I'm packless. I have no territory." "You're not packless. You have the guard. And you're not just any wolf. You're matriarch. You claim what you want and it becomes yours." The idea was intoxicating, terrifying, but also right. "Impressive, isn't it?" Kieran's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him in wolf form, his scarred face somehow even more striking with dark fur surrounding it. "The way the power feels when you let it flow freely." She shifted back to human, and he did the same. They stood there on the cliff, the wind whipping around them, both naked as wolves always were after shifting. But it didn't feel awkward. It felt natural. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Lead for so long without burning out?" "I don't lead," Kieran said simply. "I serve. I've been waiting 500 years to serve the right person. And now..." He turned to look at her, and in his storm-gray eyes, she saw something that made her breath catch. Not just respect, not just loyalty. Something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken. Now I've found her. Celeste's heart hammered. The Yarr, scent of him, oak and snow and storms, wrapped around her like an embrace. Kieran, you don't have to respond, he said quickly. I know you're still healing from the rejection. I know you need time. I just wanted you to know you're not alone. You'll never be alone again. He started to turn away, but she caught his arm. When he looked back, questioning, she stepped closer, close enough to feel his body heat, close enough to see her reflection in his eyes. I'm not alone, she agreed softly, because you're here, all of you, my chosen family, my guard. She paused. My mate, if you want to be. Kieran's eyes widened. Celeste, you don't have to. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing something for myself, choosing someone who chose me first. She placed her hand over his heart, feeling it race beneath her palm. I'm saying it because the bond snapped into place 3 days ago, and I've been too scared to tell. You, his hand covered hers, warm and steady. I felt it too. I didn't want to push. After what happened with, he wasn't my mate, she interrupted. Not really. The moon goddess put that bond there to break it, to free me. But this, she pressed closer. This is real. Kieran's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. Then yes, he breathed. Yes, I want to be yours. I've been yours since the moment I saw you dying in that barn, and everything in me screamed to protect you. When he kissed her, it was nothing like she'd imagined kisses would be. It was fierce and gentle all at once, claiming and surrendering, and she felt the mate bond between them solidify into something unbreakable, something chosen, something perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. My matriarch, he whispered. My commander, she replied and smiled. My mate. The moon shone bright above them, and Celeste Ashwood, no longer broken, no longer cast out, no longer nothing, felt truly happy for the first time in her life. They discovered her parents' role by accident. 2 months after her transformation, Celeste woke one morning to find Dax and Sage had returned from a scouting mission with grim expressions. Silvercrest Pack has been searching for you, Dax reported. They've sent trackers into the wildlands. We erased your trail, but he hesitated. We found something else, a journal. Belonged to a pack elder. He handed it to her, leather-bound, old, pages yellowed with age. Celeste opened it with trembling hands and began to read. The truth spilled out in faded ink. Her parents had known. From the moment she was born under a moonless sky, they'd known what she was, and they'd been terrified. So they'd sought out a witch, one of the few who still dealt with wolves, and paid her to bind Celeste's power, to trap it so deep inside her that it would never surface, to make her appear Omega when she was anything but. We did it to protect her, her mother's handwriting read, in a letter copied into the journal. The pack would have killed her. Better she live as Omega than die as matriarch. But the binding had done more than suppress her power. It had suppressed her wolf entirely, leaving her vulnerable, weak, unable to defend herself. It had trapped her in a prison of their making, all while they told themselves it was for her own good. Celeste read until the words blurred, then carefully closed the journal. She felt Kieran's hand on her shoulder, steadying her. They were afraid, she said quietly. They thought they were saving me. They crippled you, Lyra said bluntly, for 23 years. Yes, Celeste stood, the journal clutched in her hands. They did, and one day they'll answer for it. But first, she looked at Kieran. First, we have bigger problems. If Silvercrest is sending trackers this far out, it means they know something, or suspect something. The prophecy was never secret, Kieran acknowledged. Any pack with old records would know about the matriarch. If word spread that you survived the rejection, they'd come for me. Celeste felt her wolf stir, no longer meek but fierce. Then let them come. I'm done hiding. The enemy found them 3 days later. Celeste had been working on her healing abilities with Sage when Wolf's howl split the afternoon. Warning, danger, intruders. The guard mobilized instantly, forming a defensive perimeter around the cave system, and Celeste shifted without thought, her massive silver-white form ready for battle. She smelled them before she saw them, 27 wolves, all bearing Silvercrest's scent, led by Darius. The Alpha King stepped into the clearing in human form, flanked by Seraphina and his beta, Marcus. Behind them, warriors filled the space between trees, all shifted and snarling. The scent of aggression hung thick in the air, but Darius's expression wasn't triumphant. It was desperate. "Celeste," he called out, "I know you're here. Please, I just want to talk." Kieran growled, a sound that made several of the Silvercrest wolves step back nervously. In human form, he stood between Darius and the cave entrance. "You lost the right to speak her name when you rejected her. You have 5 seconds to leave our territory before we end you." "Your territory?" Darius's eyes widened as he took in the Shadow Guard, 10 massive wolves that dwarfed his own warriors. "Who the hell are you?" "We are the ones who found what you threw away," Kieran said coldly. "We are the ones who will end you if you don't—" "Wait." Celeste shifted, standing naked and unashamed beside her mate. She felt the moment Darius truly saw her, saw how she'd changed, grown, become something he couldn't even comprehend, and the recognition in his face was bitter. "I'll talk to him." "Celeste," Kieran began. "I need to do this," she said softly, touching his arm. "Trust me?" He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Always. But we'll be right here." She walked forward until she stood 10 feet from Darius. Up close, she could see how much he'd changed in 2 months. He looked haggard, tired, and his scent, once so compelling, now made her wolf recoil in disgust. "You look different," Darius said, and she heard the shock in his voice. "I can feel your power from here. How is that possible?" "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," Celeste replied evenly. "Why are you here?" "The pack is falling apart," he admitted, and the pain in his voice sounded genuine. "Since the rejection, everything's gone wrong. The alliance with Ironclaw collapsed. Seraphina's father backed out when he realized what I'd done. Half the pack is in open revolt. They say I went against the moon goddess's will, and now we're cursed." "You are cursed," Celeste said flatly. "You rejected your true mate for political gain. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" "I thought—" He raked a hand through his hair. "I thought I was doing what was best for the pack. You were Omega. How could you lead beside me? How could you—" He stopped, really looking at her. "But you were never Omega, were you?" "No, I wasn't. And you'll never know what I could have been, because you were too blind to see past your own ambition." Seraphina stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted with anger. "You dare speak to an alpha that way, you little—" The words died in her throat as Celeste's eyes flashed gold, and power radiated from her in a wave that made every wolf present, including Darius, instinctively crouch in submission. "I am Matriarch," Celeste said, her voice ringing with command that couldn't be denied. "I am the one the prophecy promised. I am the bloodline you thought was extinct, and you, Seraphina Cain, are trespassing in my territory." Seraphina went pale. That's just a legend." "Does she look like a legend to you?" Kieran asked mockingly. Seraphina snarled, and in a flash shifted and lunged directly at Celeste. The female wolf was fast, strong, and alpha in her prime. Under normal circumstances she would have torn through an Omega in seconds, but there was nothing normal about Celeste anymore. She shifted mid-lunge, meeting Seraphina in the air. The 2 wolves collided, and for a heartbeat they grappled. Then Celeste's jaws closed around Seraphina's throat, not enough to kill, but enough to completely immobilize, and she slammed the smaller wolf to the ground with such force that the earth cracked. Seraphina went limp, submitting instantly, whimpering in terror. Celeste held her there for 3 long seconds, making sure every wolf present understood who was dominant, then released her. She shifted back, standing over Seraphina's prone form. "You live," Celeste said coldly, "because I choose mercy. But if you ever threaten me or mine again, I will end you. Do you understand?" Seraphina shifted back, blood trickling from her throat, and crawled backward. I understand, Matriarch. Please, go, take your pack and leave, and tell them what you saw here." Seraphina fled, and most of the Silvercrest warriors followed her, but Darius remained. He stood frozen, staring at Celeste with something that might have been awe or might have been horror. I made a mistake, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. The biggest mistake of my life. You should have trusted the moon goddess, Celeste interrupted, but you didn't, and now you have to live with that choice. Is there any way to fix this? Any way to— No, the word was final. The bond is broken. I'm mated to another, and even if I wasn't, I would never go back to someone who saw me as nothing. Darius's shoulders slumped. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to one knee. Behind him, the remaining Silvercrest wolves followed suit. Then I beg forgiveness, not for my sake, but for my pack's. They've suffered for my mistakes. Please, show them the mercy you showed Seraphina. Celeste looked at him, this man who'd once seemed so powerful, now on his knees before her, and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a distant pity. Your pack may send representatives to petition for peace, she said after a long moment, if they can prove they're willing to follow the old laws, to respect all wolves regardless of rank, to honor the bonds the moon goddess creates, to protect rather than exploit the vulnerable. Then I'll consider it. But you, she shook her head, you can never enter my territory again. Consider this your only warning. Darius bowed his head. Thank you. Thank you, matriarch. He rose, shifted, and disappeared into the trees with his remaining warriors. When they were gone, Celeste's legs gave out. Kieran caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her against his chest. You were magnificent, he murmured into her hair. I was terrified, she admitted. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. Around them, the shadow guard shifted back to human form. Lyra approached, her ice-blue eyes bright with approval. They'll tell others what they saw here, she said. Word will spread. Every pack in the territory will know the matriarch has returned. Good, Celeste said, straightening. Let them know. Let them understand that the old ways are coming back. That power isn't just about dominance anymore. What will you do with all this? Kieran asked, gesturing to the forest around them. You've claimed it. It's yours now. Celeste looked around at the guard, her chosen family, her protectors, her friends, at Kieran, her mate, her partner, her equal, and she felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders, but it didn't feel crushing. It felt right. I'll build something better, she said simply. A pack where no one is thrown away for being born different, where power is used to protect, not control, where the moon goddess's choices are honored, not rejected. That's a tall order, Thorn observed. Celeste smiled, fierce and bright and utterly fearless. Then it's a good thing I have all of you to help. 6 months later, Celeste stood on the cliff where she'd first accepted her bond with Kieran and looked out over the valley that had become known as the matriarch's domain. Word had spread quickly. Within weeks of her confrontation with Darius, wolves had begun arriving, rogues seeking sanctuary, omegas fleeing abuse, even a few betas and alphas who wanted to be part of something new. She'd accepted them all, but with strict conditions: respect for all ranks, protection of the vulnerable, honor for the moon goddess's will, and absolute loyalty to the pack's laws. They'd built structures, not the grand pack houses of the old territories, but something better. Communal spaces where wolves of all ranks lived and worked together, training grounds where everyone learned combat, regardless of birth status, healing centers where those with the gift could help any who needed it. And at the center of it all, Celeste led with Kieran at her side and the shadow guard watching over them all. Her parents had come 3 months ago. They'd arrived broken, begging forgiveness, bearing the journal as proof of their crimes. Celeste had listened to their confession, how they'd bound her power out of fear, how they'd stood by while she was rejected, how they'd realized too late what they'd done. She hadn't forgiven them, not yet, maybe never. But she'd offered them a chance to atone, working in the pack's orphanage, caring for pups who'd lost their parents, proving through action that they'd changed. They're trying, Kieran observed, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. That counts for something. Maybe, Celeste allowed. Time will tell. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, she could see wolves moving through the pack grounds, playing, working, living freely. Blood moon tomorrow, Kieran murmured. The oracle says it's significant. The oracle says everything is significant, Celeste replied, but she smiled. They'd found the old wolf 2 months ago, ancient beyond reckoning, gifted with the sight. She'd told Celeste that her destiny was only beginning, that darker threats were coming, that the return of the matriarch would draw attention from forces that had slept for centuries. "Are you worried?" Kieran asked. "No." And she realized it was true. Whatever comes, we'll face it together, all of us. She felt the presence of the Shadow Guard nearby. They were never far, and beyond them, the larger presence of her entire pack. Nearly 200 wolves now, all bound to her not by force, but by choice, by trust, by the promise of something better. "I love you," Kieran said softly, "in case I don't say it enough." "You say it constantly." She turned in his arms, looping her hands around his neck. "But I never get tired of hearing it." When he kissed her, she felt the mate bond between them sing, strong and pure and unbreakable, not a bond forced by fate, but one chosen freely, the best kind. And so Celeste Ashwood, once broken, once cast out, once nothing, stood on her territory with her mate and her pack and her power, and she was home. The girl they'd thrown away had become their queen. The Omega they'd rejected had become the matriarch. And the story they thought was ending was only just beginning. Thank you for listening to Celeste's journey from rejected Omega to powerful matriarch. Her transformation reminds us that sometimes we have to lose everything to discover who we truly are, and that real strength comes not from dominance, but from choosing to protect rather than control. What did you think of the Shadow Guard? Would you have accepted Darius's plea for mercy? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and share it with fellow werewolf romance fans. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next chapter. Because Celeste's story is far from over. The blood moon rises tomorrow, and ancient forces are stirring in the darkness. Forces that remember the matriarchs of old. Forces that want to ensure they never rise again. We'll see you in the next chapter. Until then, may the moon goddess watch over you. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.